how unfortunate it would be if the way the world is put together, that we are not the authors of our lives.
Suppose you decide to go to the Rocky Mountains for your vacation. And it's a nice vacation, but you're not by the ocean. You regret having chosen to go to the Rocky Mountains because you missed the chance to be by the sea. The regret that you feel subtracts from the satisfaction you get from being in the Rocky Mountains. So, and this is just one thing to regret. Imagine that there are 20 different vacation places you are contemplating, and each of them has some attractive feature that the other ones don't. Wherever you are, you'll spend your time thinking about how much better it would be to be where you aren't.
What we do in my lab, essentially, we study the neural basis, neural correlates of decision making. Regret is considered as an emotion, is a response based on a specific cognitive processing, and this is called counterfactual. So counterfactual means a comparison between reality and its alternative, and the alternative can be hypothetical or real, and the counterfactual itself can generate specific responses, and the regret is one of those. Then of course you might have imagine the alternative. Okay, so this is another aspect, also another creative components. Okay, in a sense, the null hypothesis that we might ignore completely the alternatives. Okay, and probably other animals that do it essentially they really stick on reality. Okay, but taking into consideration the alternative is a crucial aspect of the brain. It also is a departure from the reality. So it's a creative component of the brain, considering the what is called neuroscience the fictive or the counterfactual information. Okay, so it's almost this curiosity that we have to know what could have happened.
Counterfactual thinking is, I would argue, that is thinking about things that are contrary to fact. What would today's weather have been like if there had been a thunderstorm last night? There wasn't one. Would today be cooler if there had been a thunderstorm last night? We do this all the time. Arguably, it is the essential thought structure for science. The way you design an experiment is you say, what would happen if we took oxygen out of the environment? What would happen to a flame? And all of a sudden, you discover by doing the experiment that you won't have a flame without oxygen. So experiments are the embodiment of counterfactuals. You create a world that is different from the actual world in the hope that it will help you understand how the actual world works. It's useful even to think about your own decisions in this way. If I had chosen a different path, I might be getting better grades, or I might be doing an internship that I find more exciting. That's a good thing. But the problem is that when it's used excessively or indiscriminately, then it will get you to think negatively even about paths you're on that are successful, productive, and fulfilling paths.
We can use counterfactuals in social comparison. Okay, so when we compare the outcome of our choice with the outcome of choice made by others, and then in this sense, if we get less than the others, we can feel envy, for instance, or we can feel gloating if we get more than the others. So this mental process is fundamental, essentially, from an individual perspective to compare what we have done essentially in the past to what we could have done essentially, so compare the outcome of our choice, but also to make comparison in social terms. So when we move to the social dimension, then the counterfactual is useful essentially to tell us, to inform us how we are doing in our decision making in general, comparing ourselves with the others.
The ability that we now have to compare ourselves to pretty much anyone in the world sets us up for disappointment. In the old days, with telecommunications impoverished compared to now, how am I doing? You answered that question by looking at your neighbor down the street. Well, now you don't need to look at your neighbor down the street. You can look at your neighbor halfway around the world. And all of a sudden, how am I doing is not so good, because there's somebody 5,000 miles away from you who's doing better. And Facebook and things like that only make it worse, because I don't think the average person creates a Facebook wall of their average day, right? You look at people's Facebook posts and you think, everyone on earth is living a better life than I am. There's an economist named Robert Frank who has always had an interest in psychology. And he wrote a book almost 30 years ago called Choosing the Right Pond. And the argument in the book was that human beings are much more concerned about their relative position than they are about their absolute position. It's better to be making $50,000 a year when everyone around you is making $45,000 than it is to be making $60,000 a year when everyone around you is making $65,000. And so you can manage your happiness to some degree by managing who you compare yourself to. It's not so easy to do that. It's especially not easy to do that when the lifestyles of the rich and famous are being just shoved in your face all the time. But managing the process of social comparison is a big step toward managing your emotional reaction to your own successes and failures. The interesting thing is that there are two kinds of counterfactuals. There are upward counterfactuals, that is, counterfactuals that are better than your actual life, but you can also generate downward counterfactuals, right? There, but for the grace of God, go I. You know, you look at people who are handicapped in various ways, or who die young, or who get flooded out, or all these things, and that ought to make you feel better about your life. It just seems like there's an asymmetry. We benefit less from comparing ourselves to people and situations that are worse than we suffer from comparing ourselves to situations or people that have it better. Does it have to be that way? No. Is it hopeless? Is there nothing we can do about it? Also no. You can teach yourself to notice more the respects in which your life is better than either you expected it to be or than other people's lives. And you can train yourself maybe to notice less the respects in which it's worse. People who are by disposition happy people spend very little time on upward counterfactuals. They are not interested in how other people are doing. They're interested in how they're doing. So this is probably just a flip side of what depressed people do. So, you know, happy people, the question is, how am I doing on this task, not how am I doing compared to how you're doing.
Regret results from an act in the past, from which we can draw a comparison. And depending on the act and what we're comparing, the feeling can vary. Remorse, for instance, is a moral kind of regret. Shame is a social kind of regret. There's another more subtle flavor, however, that's directly linked to the presence of options we had to give up on, and this is called missed opportunities.
With regret, you're saying, I made a mistake. I ordered the chicken. I should have ordered the fish. With missed opportunities, you say, well, I ordered the fish and it was the right thing for me to order, but I'm sorry I'm not also going to be able to taste the chicken, and I'm sorry I'm not also going to be able to taste the steak. I didn't make a mistake ordering the fish, but all these attractive other things that I had to say no to, that I wish I didn't have to say no to, are going to make me get less satisfaction out of the thing I said yes to. Technically, the opportunity cost is really what you would gain from the second best option, right? If I didn't order the fish, I would have ordered the chicken. It doesn't matter what else is on the menu, because you wouldn't have chosen them anyway. But in practice, psychologically, we don't stop with the chicken. We also look at what we liked about the steak and what we liked about the pasta and so on. And the interesting thing is that by and large, the point economists make is that people are insensitive to opportunity costs.
So from a pure monetary point of view, of course, since we are just to maximize our payoff, our outcome, our money, then we should not consider regret. I mean, if you're rational, and then you shouldn't care about emotion, okay? This is true I mean, if our life and our utility were just based on money, okay? But it is not, actually, and the physiology matters. It is rational. I mean, if you know ex ante that you are going to feel regret, and regret is negative, so anyway it decreases your utility, then anticipating this then becomes rational. One aspect of avoiding or anticipating regret is not taking a choice, okay? To avoid regret, actually, we do not choose, because we feel that the wrong choice is worse than a no choice.
And that's how the final symptom in the choice problem leads us right back to the first one: paralysis.
The only way to avoid regretting a decision is by not making it. And so for people who are especially sensitive to regret, you defer or avoid decisions altogether as a way of avoiding regret. And we created a scale to measure how sensitive people are to regret. Not everyone is equally concerned that they'll regret their decisions. Not surprisingly, there's a high correlation between being sensitive to regret and being a maximizer. If you're worried you'll regret your decision, well then, damn it, only the best will do.
The reason we want to avoid regret so much is because it acts like a reminder, not just of a bad experience, but of our role in making it happen.
Important issue is that regret is very specific, essentially, so it's not just a general response to negative outcome that we may get, and it is an important aspect. So essentially, what we found in our studies is that there is an amplification effect of this emotion. In terms, it's more painful to feel regret than disappointment, for instance. So the source of the negative experience is fundamental, but regret is something different. Regret, at least how we define, is really related with our responsibility of our choice. So the agency is there.
Regret hurts because it reminds us we are responsible. It's a consequence of our belief in our own free will.
The study we run with children is very clear. So regrets coincide with the moment with children are able to understand the agency effect, that they're agents of their choices. And before that is not regret. They do not report. They might feel negative, of course. They might report negative responses to negative outcome, but they don't get the link between a choice and outcome, between their own action and the consequences.
We're always asking ourselves, why did this or that happen? We're trying to find causes for everything. I think this is almost like what it means to be a human. Why did this happen to me? But the question is it the world's fault or is it your fault? You know, being in a hurricane, it may wreck your life in a variety of ways, but you don't blame yourself for the hurricane. But, you know, failing to get the job, well, whose fault is that?
By multiplying the choices for us to make, the world we live in is multiplying the agency effect, and therefore amplifying regret.
This explosion of choice, instead of empowering and liberating people, has really enhanced a kind of pathology. We know from epidemiological evidence that clinical depression is at higher rates than it ever was before. It's affecting people younger. There are more suicide attempts, the more successful suicides than there ever were before. And the question, of course, is why, when you give people exactly what they want and the freedom to live their lives as they see fit, you would expect that depression would sort of be like polio. But it's not happening. What makes you potentially clinically depressed is not that bad stuff is happening, but rather that bad stuff is happening that you think is your fault. When the set of options is small, and you buy a disappointing bottle of wine or an ill-fitting pair of jeans and you ask why, your answer is, it's the world's fault. What could I do? When the set of options is essentially infinite and you buy a disappointing bottle of wine or an ill-fitting pair of jeans and you ask why, it's hard to resist the conclusion that you did something wrong. And I think self-blame has a lot to do with the growth of clinical depression.
It's about it essentially. Okay, it's about blaming ourselves. A patient with depression, actually severe depression, they generate even excessive counterfactual, different realities. Okay, of different self essentially, multiple selves. Always comparing reality with something better, for instance, or thinking that your reality is bad. Okay, so for instance, this function of this can generate pathology. Okay, like delusion, schizophrenia. Okay, where you create an alternative, a paranoia or an alternative world, and then you cannot go back to reality.
By studying the link between regret and agency, we can see how together they can fuel some of the worst possible mental states. But by studying more specifically how regret operates at the level of the brain, we might also find what it's useful for, and more importantly, why it's something we should want to have.
What we've done in our lab is looking directly in the brain with the fMRI, okay, with the functional magnetic resonance imaging, where we really can track the neural correlates of what we've been studying. And there, indeed, we found a network, okay, in the brain that is related with regrets. And this network is mainly composed by three regions. Indeed, the orbitofrontal cortex, but also the rostro-anterior cingulate cortex, in a part of the cingulate cortex that is strongly associated with cognition. So regret is an emotion that if we don't think, we don't feel. And then this information is transmitted to the hippocampus, which is the memory area, okay, in such a way to leave a trace, a biological trace in the brain about our experience, okay, in the sense, you have done something wrong, keep it in mind for the future. This storage and this accumulation of regret essentially can facilitate the induction of more cognition. What does it mean? That we ask to our brain, like, look, now that we are in a similar situation as before, where we have done something wrong, now we have to put all our cognitive ability to solve the same task, okay, and try to avoid the regrettable situation. And this is essentially the story that we found in the brain.
I think that regret has to be understood in the same way the law has to be understood, as an element in a very complex and delicate recursive system, reflective system. It's not just a feeling that comes and is unpleasant. It's a feeling that comes and goes through our whole psyche, tweaking this and that. It is part of self-renewal, self-repair. It's not just backward-looking, it has forward-looking effects. And a person who didn't exhibit regret, that was incapable of regret, would be a person who you couldn't expect to mend their ways, to improve, to reform. Regret is very important.
We first study a group of patients with lesion in a specific part of the brain. What we found is that essentially they are impaired in regrets. Okay, they are unable to report, to feel regrets, and even more importantly is that they are also unable to use regrets in their decision making. Okay, so their experience is they do not experience, and they are not able indeed to change their behavior, to adapt their behavior to the environment after essentially a negative experience. That's why they have problem in social interaction, they have problem in sometimes legal also. They talk about illegal acts that they've done, but like we are talking about, coffee and chocolate.
I'm not saying people don't make bad decisions all the time. I feel it more as a natural selection thing. There's things going on, decisions being made every day, every this, and boom, and they happen, and you go on, and the next one's coming, and boom, you got to deal with that one, and boom, you got to deal with that one. So in the normal way we make decisions, you make good and better decisions by doing good and better acquiring of the data from the world, of information about the world and your life and your values and all the rest of it. And to me, I see it as a very hopeful, positive, wonderful thing about the species. You're as good as you want to make life to be.
The important aspect is learning. If we do learn through the lifespan, through experience, being open to change essentially, and then being able to adjust and adapt ourselves. And this is also, what, for instance, what we found in children. We saw regrets appearing at 7, 8 years old, both in boys and girls, and female and male participants. But then what we found is that both groups report regrets, but then just the female anticipate regrets. So they change their behavior, okay, in a way that they become much more risk averse or regret averse over time, while boys keep going, making the wrong choice, even though they report it. Okay, so it is very important essentially to make the link between. So it's not enough to feel it essentially, but you need a system that allowed you to use this information over time and for the future.
We have this enormous educational system in human culture, and the whole point of it is to teach people how to do things less dumb. Right? And that's what our species does. All we do is try to teach. Everywhere you're trying to teach. I'm trying to teach. Brothers and sisters are trying to teach each other. I mean, we're constantly trying to inform the other how to make better decisions. And that is the basis for a positive, good life.